It took me 16 hours to finish Reverie Knight's Tactics on the normal difficulty mode. If you remember our video from last week, I advised not doing that because it was too difficult. Well, it turns out I was wrong and wasn't really playing the game quite right. It's not perfect, but one sees Reverie Knight's Tactics is a worthy addition to the tactical RPG genre. Developed by 40 Giants Entertainment, what does Reverie Knights bring to the table? Well, let's find out. You play as a female mage called Aurora, who embarks on an expedition to find her father, who had travelled to the city of Lenorian. This long-lost elven city had come under attack from a variety of malevolent forces, and it's up to you as Aurora, with a few companions, to team up with the elves in the forest and then make your own way to the city to try and recover whatever's left of that expedition. Narrative is delivered through these cutscenes. There's no voice acting, and it never really felt like I'd got to know them. Aurora is certainly the most fleshed out of the four characters, but the elf is pretty much always upset, and Brigadine, the comic relief character, ended up just coming across as a bit annoying. There are a few choices that you can make during the narrative, and they're based on the order and chaos system. This simple yin-yang symbol comes in the middle of the screen, and your choices will then reflect your character's nature and may change the outcome of certain scenarios. By the end of the game, most of these came across as slightly arbitrary. There might be a tiny difference to a line of dialogue, and it has an impact on the very end, but other than that, as with so many games before it, the decisions don't have a massive impact. Now, as far as gameplay and controls go, this is where my favourite aspect comes in, and that's from the tactical combat itself. From the world map, you can choose your next location. When you enter combat, you'll have to place your troops. However, there are times when you may find yourself ambushed and having to just defend straight away. The controls are very straightforward. Using the bumper buttons, you can switch quickly between each of your available units, and then it's a case of up, down, left and right to move them wherever you want to go and press A. I draw attention to the ease of control because I actually watched a few reviews that mentioned that the controls were very difficult, and it's simply not the case. They almost couldn't be simpler. The only slight tweak I would make is that when you pan the camera with the right stick, that the cursor would then follow that. That's not the case, you have to return and move that manually. But character manipulation, firing off skills, and overall control is absolutely fine. The game's split into two difficulty modes, story and normal, and it does suffer from a very early difficulty spike based predominantly on not explaining enough to the player. Every single battle is crafted in such a way that you can overcome it without taking almost any damage. You'll notice a number of traps around the area, and it's vital to use these, but also it's very important to use your team. Now, you can do team attacks up to 4 players, with 4 obviously being the most powerful, and Aurora has a very early skill which allows her to teleport players to a location. If you use this on an enemy, you can bring them right into the middle of that 3-man attack, essentially drawing them to yourself and eliminating them quickly. Alongside this, other characters like Brigadine have the ability to push enemies into traps. When you're placing your troops at the start of a round, it's vitally important to take into account exactly where the traps are located. Through a combination of being aware of the traps as well as your own mana and abilities, suddenly what seemed like an impossibly difficult game became absolutely fine. Now, that being said, it still does suffer from one big issue. Earlier on, you simply couldn't craft any health potions. If you were particularly unlucky in combat, there was a chance that you'd end up with no health, no way of healing, and essentially no way of winning, and you could have to restart. That's not good design. In your base camp, you've got several different areas. One for crafting different cakes, which will improve your health or mana. Your captain later allows you to craft bombs. These are essential and use the ingredients from monsters. And then there's the goblin, who can use your gained experience points to create permanent buffs. These may increase your mana or health, and again, very important and not really given enough time in the form of tutorial. One last aspect which you could entirely miss are that many of the screens are scrollable. If you scroll left and right, they act almost like a hidden item game. You might find mushrooms which are used for healing, other trinkets or potions. With the aforementioned early difficulty, scouring every section of your early base camp can mean the difference between winning and losing. The saving grace for the normal difficulty is that when you reach level, your character restores their mana and health. You could then plan this into your tactics. Rather than healing up those characters that were damaged, you could carry them through the next round with a player with higher health so that they would level up and then their health would be restored. By the very end of the game, you don't need any of this. It's much easier to heal, you'll have an abundance of health potions, and you'll be steamrolling your way through enemies. The game's never easy, but it gets easier and easier as it goes on. Aside from the combat, there are a number of boss fights. Two of these were okay and one was absolutely ridiculous. Its design was heavily flawed and it was another situation where there's a good chance you could get stuck forever. I think I managed to completely luck out to get through it, but the developers do need to think more carefully about all players rather than just the one lucky one. There are a few puzzles in the game, such as moving around slates to make an image or unlocking a cave through the manipulation of these lights. They can be quite tricky, but you'll generally get there in the end through trial and error. There's a lock-picking system in the game as well, where you can find treasure chests, and I thought that was probably the best puzzle, the little lock-picking mechanic. Overall, Reverie Knight's tactics is fun, but it's also flawed. Its weakest aspect for me was the story delivery. I never really cared enough about the characters, but combat on the other hand ended up surprisingly satisfying with a good amount of skills and ends, as far as balancing goes, in the way it should have began. Still, fans will enjoy it. I give gameplay 15 out of 20. For controls, I give 17 out of 20. From a visual standpoint, Reverie Knight's tactics is a mixed bag. On the one hand, some of the hand-painted battle locations look fantastic, but on the other, some of the character designs just don't look right. It's as if they're stripped from an entirely different game. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I think the only way to say it is that they look a bit cheap. They're very static and also a little bit strange in terms of the clothing the characters are wearing. Not my cup of tea. What's brilliant are some of the character animations in battle. Particular note has to go to Brigadine when she dies and her shield falls on her face, but all is not perfect in this area either. When you do team attacks, some of them look really good and some just look okay, but where they fall down is in the audio department. When we look at sound and music then, the musical score is pleasant enough. There are some nice melodies here, but they are overused to the nth degree. You'll hear the exact same song at the start of the game that you'll be hearing all the way through to the end credits. Then there are the sound effects. When you're in combat, there just aren't enough of them. And obviously there are no voice actors here. When you combine all of these elements together, despite performance being decent, it comes off feeling a little bit flat. And although I haven't played a great deal in handheld, I can say that the text size hasn't been an issue. Visuals and performance score 12 out of 20, and the audio also scores 12 out of 20. Reverie Knight's tactics can be had physically for an RRP of £25, however it's already available cheaper, but for digital buyers it's £20.99 or your regional equivalent, and it is nice to see a lower price for a digital copy. It has a download size of 6.4 gigs, and for a few hours it's still 15% off. As far as game length goes, well, it took me 16 hours. I am notoriously slow, so I think you could probably do this in 12. I wouldn't say there's a great deal of replayability here. Even with the different choices you can make, I'm not sure it offers enough incentive. It's a fun game and I have enjoyed it, and I do think 40 Giants need to look at balancing for their next title, but they do a very solid job with the tactical turn-based combat. If you're a fan of the genre, you're not going to be disappointed if you were to pick this one up now or in a sale. Overall, I give value 15 out of 20. Reverie Knights gets a SwitchUp score of 71%. If you haven't tried Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark on Switch, I highly recommend it. Personally, it's my pick out of these two titles. Thanks to all of you who enjoy the content, I hope this has been useful, and to our patrons, you guys support us, it is quality. Thank you so much. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!